The sun was a merciless hammer, beating the cracked earth into a shimmering haze where the horizon bled into the sky. Inside the conquered stagecoach, the air was a stifling cocktail of dust, stale sweat, and the cheap perfume of the woman fanning herself across from Jedediah Jed Stone. He sat stiffly, his gaze fixed on the blur of mesquite and cholla cactus whipping past the window, his broad shoulders barely fitting the cramped confines. A decade had passed since he had last worn the star of a Texas Ranger, but the weight of it still settled on him like a shroud. At 47, his face was a roadmap of hard miles and harder memories etched into sun-cured leather. His hair, once the color of dark river water, was now streaked with the gray of old ghosts. He was heading to redemption. The name was a bitter irony, a cruel joke played by whatever god oversaw this forsaken stretch of Texas. Jed wasn't seeking redemption. He believed himself long past it. He was running as he had been for 10 years from the smoke-choked memory of a night that had burned his life to the ground. The sudden crack of a rifle shot shattered the drowsy rhythm of the journey. The coach lurched violently, throwing the passengers into a heap. Wood splintered. A woman screamed a high, thin sound, swallowed by a second gunshot. The driver's panicked cry was cut short. Jed moved. The years of civilian life sloughed off him in an instant, replaced by the cold, coiled readiness of the ranger he once was. "Stay down!" He barked, his voice a low gravel that cut through the panic. He drew the Colt Peacemaker from the holster tucked beneath his duster, its familiar weight a grim comfort in his hand. He kicked open the door, using it as a shield as he scanned the ambush. 4 men, their faces masked by dirty bandanas, were positioned behind a rocky outcrop. Their horses, agitated by the gunfire, stamped nervously nearby. One was unhitching their team while the others laid down covering fire. A routine robbery, but routine could get you killed just as easily as anything else. Gunsmoke filled the air. Wood splintered. A man screamed. Jed moved. He dropped to one knee, the alkali dust puffing up around him. He sighted down the barrel of the Colt, his hand as steady as the rock he braced it against. The world narrowed to the space between the hammer and the target. He squeezed the trigger. The bandit closest to the horses crumpled, a dark stain blossoming on his chest. One down. A bullet whined past Jed's ear, close enough to make the fine hairs on his neck stand up. He ducked back behind the coach wheel, the acrid smell of gunpowder sharp in his nostrils. The remaining bandits, startled by the swift professional resistance from a lone passenger, concentrated their fire on his position. Splinters flew from the wooden spokes like shrapnel. He reloaded with practiced economy, his fingers never fumbling his mind a cold, clear slate. This was what he was made for. This violent calculus of survival was the only thing that had ever silenced the ghosts. He peered under the carriage. He saw a pair of dusty boots. He aimed low, the bullet kicking up a cloud of dirt before finding its mark in the man's leg. A howl of pain confirmed the hit. 2 down. The last 2 hesitated, their confidence shattered. That was their mistake. Jed rose, a wraith of dust and vengeance, and fired twice more in quick succession. The reports from his Colt were a deafening percussion in the sudden quiet. The 3rd man fell backward. The last, seeing his companions dispatched with such brutal efficiency, threw his rifle down and scrambled for his horse. Jed let him go. He was a ranger, not an executioner, or at least he used to be. Silence descended, broken only by the whimpering of the passengers and the nervous whinny of a horse. Jed stood, the Colt still smoking in his hand, his chest heaving. And then he felt it. A cold, empty space against his chest. He looked down. The thin leather cord around his neck was broken. On the ground, half buried in the dust, lay a small, tarnished silver locket. It had been knocked from his neck during the fight. One of the hinges had broken, and it lay open like a shattered promise. The tiny hand-painted portrait inside a young woman, with eyes the color of a summer sky, and a smile that could gentle the wildest Mustang, stared up at him. Isabella. The sight of it broken and dirtied broke something in him as well. The desert landscape dissolved the shimmering heat, replaced by the biting cold of a winter night, 10 years past. Flashback. The smell of pine and burning wood. Flames roared against a starless sky, a monstrous, hungry beast devouring a small ranch house. He was younger then, his face harder, his eyes holding a certainty that was now long dead. He and his men were tracking a gang of rustlers who had taken refuge there. They had called for a surrender. The answer had been a volley of gunfire. The fight had been short and brutal. When the last shot was fired and the smoke began to clear, they had moved in. That's when they found them. Not the rustlers, but a family. A man, his wife, and their young son huddled in the root cellar, victims of smoke inhalation. And another. A young woman burned beyond recognition, clutching a swaddling blanket that was nothing but charred fabric. Isabella. His Isabella, who had left him to marry another man, a rancher named Daniel Blackwood. He hadn't known she was here. He had led the raid that killed her. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. The guilt, a familiar predator, sank its teeth into him once more. He had quit the Rangers the next day, trading his star for a bottle and a decade of aimless wandering. He had kept the locket a twin to the one he had given her as a constant self-inflicted punishment. A reminder of the innocent lives his actions had cost. He knelt, his hand trembling as he reached for the broken pieces. The stagecoach driver, a portly man with a bloodied bandage around his head, approached him cautiously. "Mister," he said, his voice shaky. I ain't never seen shootin' like that. You some kind of lawman." Jed closed his fist around the locket, the sharp edges digging into his palm. He pushed the memories back into the dark cage where they belonged. "Not anymore." He rasped, his voice thick with dust and grief. "Just a passenger." He climbed back into the coach, the broken locket a cold weight in his hand, a tangible piece of the past he could never outrun. The other passengers stared at him with a mixture of awe and fear. They saw a hero. He saw only the ghost of a man riding toward a town called Redemption, a place he knew he would never find. The town of Redemption, baked under the afternoon sun, a collection of tired-looking clapboard buildings huddled along a single wide street of beaten dirt. A lone dog panted in the sliver of shade offered by a horse trough. The air was thick with a silence that felt heavier than mere quiet. It felt like resignation. As Jed stepped down from the stagecoach, the dust settling on his worn boots, he could feel 100 unseen eyes watching him from behind sun-bleached curtains and dirty saloon windows. This was a town holding its breath. He checked into the only hotel, a 2-story building, with a sign that creaked a mournful complaint with every gust of wind. The room was small, smelled of stale whiskey and regret, and offered a view of the gallows, standing stark and skeletal in the town square. It suited him just fine. After washing the trail dust from his face, he made his way to the saloon. It was here, in the dim, cool heart of a town, that you could take its pulse. The saloon was sparsely populated. A few grizzled prospectors nursed their drinks, their faces maps of disappointment. A bartender with a tired face polished a glass with a rag that had seen better days. The quiet was broken only by the soft, rhythmic click of a pocket watch chain against a vest. The man holding the watch sat alone at a corner table, a glass of untouched whiskey before him. He was impeccably dressed in a tailored black suit, a stark contrast to the faded denim and buckskin of the other patrons. His hair was silver at the temples, his face handsome but unnervingly still, like a porcelain mask. He radiated an aura of cold, coiled power that seemed to suck the very warmth from the room. As Jed approached the bar, the man's eyes, the color of a winter sky, lifted and met his. There was no warmth in them, only a calm, measuring intelligence. "A stranger." The man said, his voice smooth and articulate, carrying easily across the room. "We don't get many of those in Redemption." Jed ordered a whiskey and turned, leaning an elbow on the bar. "Just passing through." The man smiled, a thin, bloodless motion of his lips. Everyone who comes to Redemption is just passing through. And yet, they often find a reason to stay, or are given one. I am Silas Blackwood. I have a vested interest in the comings and goings of this town. The name sent a faint, unpleasant shiver down Jed's spine. Blackwood. The same name as the man Isabella had married. A coincidence, likely. It was a common enough name. "A Jedediah Stone." Jed replied, his voice flat. Blackwood's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Mr. Stone, I trust your journey was uneventful." His gaze flickered toward the street where the bullet-scarred stagecoach was still being tended to. "It had its moments," Jed said. "So I hear." Blackwood murmured, his attention returning to his watch. "Heroism is a rare and often foolish commodity. I trust you'll find our town offers little opportunity for it." It was a statement, but it landed like a warning. Jed downed his whiskey, the burn, a familiar fire in his gut. He could feel the weight of Blackwood's influence in the bartender's averted eyes, in the way the other patrons kept their heads down. This was Silas Blackwood's town. He left the saloon and walked the length of the street, his senses on high alert. He saw it in the shuttered storefronts, the for sale signs written in the same neat, precise hand, and in the tense, weary faces of the people he passed. Blackwood wasn't just a resident. He was an infection. His walk took him to the edge of town, where the baked earth gave way to the sparse vegetation of the chaparral. It was there he saw them, a man and a young woman, leading a pair of ponies laden with supplies. The man was Comanche, his bearing proud and unyielding, his face a testament to a life lived under the open sky. His long dark hair was woven with eagle feathers, and his gaze was as sharp and far-seeing as a hawk's. But it was the girl who held Jed's attention. She was perhaps 17 or 18, with the same raven-dark hair as her companion, but her skin was a shade lighter, and her eyes were a startling, impossible blue. The color of a summer sky. Isabella's eyes. She moved with a natural grace, a blend of the Comanche world she clearly belonged to, and something else, something familiar, that tugged at a deeply buried chord in Jed's memory. Around her neck, glinting in the harsh sunlight, was a silver locket. As they passed him, the girl's curious blue eyes met his. For a fleeting second, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. He felt a jolt of recognition, so powerful it almost buckled his knees. It was absurd. A trick of the light, a phantom of his grief. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he was staring at a ghost. The Comanche warrior Kills the Bear noticed his stare. His expression hardened his hand, moving almost imperceptibly toward the knife at his belt. He placed himself slightly between Jed and the girl, a silent protective gesture. Jed gave a slow, deliberate nod, a sign of respect, and stepped back, letting them pass. He watched them go, the girl's laughter carrying back to him on the dry wind, a light melodic sound in the oppressive silence of redemption. He returned to his hotel room, and the image of the girl burned into his mind. He took out his own broken locket, laying the two pieces on the rickety nightstand. He stared at the face of his lost love, then thought of the girl with the impossible blue eyes. He had come to this town to bury his past, but it seemed the ghosts of redemption had other plans. The name Blackwood, the girl with Isabella's eyes, the palpable sense of dread hanging over the town. And they were loose threads, and his old ranger instincts, dormant for so long, were beginning to pull at them. The days that followed settled into a tense routine. Jed watched and he listened. He learned that Silas Blackwood had arrived in Redemption about 9 years ago, a man of quiet means, who quickly and ruthlessly began to amass a fortune. He bought the failing bank, the struggling general store, and ranch after ranch from men broken by drought or debt. His methods were always legal, always precise, and always final. Men who refused to sell found their wells mysteriously running dry or their cattle sickened. The local sheriff was a paunchy, compliant man who clearly drew his salary from Blackwood's coffers. What troubled Jed was the pattern. Blackwood wasn't just buying land. He was buying specific parcels, all of them bordering the vast, arid territory the Comanche considered their own. And at the center of this patchwork of acquisitions were the charred ruins of an old ranch. The Blackwood Ranch, the place where Isabella had died. He spent an afternoon in the county clerk's office, a dusty room filled with the musty smell of aging paper. The clerk, a small, nervous man with ink-stained fingers, was reluctant to grant him access to the deeds until Jed placed a silver dollar on the counter. The coin and the cold look in Jed's eyes was enough. He traced the history of the land, his finger following the lines on the brittle maps. Every parcel Blackwood had purchased had once belonged in some way to Isabella's family or her husband's. This wasn't a business venture. It was an obsession, a methodical, patient reclamation of a painful past. His investigation kept leading him back to the Comanche. The townspeople spoke of them in hushed, fearful tones, blaming them for every lost cow or dry well. They were a convenient scapegoat, and it was clear Blackwood was fanning the flames of that fear, using it to justify his expansion and to further isolate the tribe. The warrior he had seen kills the bear was their leader. The girl, they called her Mourning Dove. They said Kills the Bear had found her as an infant, a miracle survivor of a locust plague that had swept through the region nearly 18 years ago. Jed sought them out, riding into the chaparral that Blackwood was so keen on acquiring. He found their camp nestled in a hidden canyon, a place of quiet dignity that stood in stark contrast to the festering tension of Redemption. He came in peace with his hands empty and visible, and was met by Kills the Bear at the edge of the camp. The man from the town, Kills the Bear, said his English deliberate and clear, carrying no accent beyond the weight of his own authority. "You have a name. Jedediah Stone. Your eyes carry a storm, Jedediah Stone. You are not a man at peace." "I'm not looking for peace," Jed replied. "I'm looking for answers. About Silas Blackwood." Kills the Bear's expression remained impassive, but a flicker of something contempt perhaps showed in his dark eyes. He is a spider spinning a web of paper and fear. He wishes to own the land, to put his brand on the earth itself. A lesson your people have yet to learn. The earth does not belong to you or me. We belong to it. It was then that Mourning Dove emerged from a nearby teepee. She carried a basket of herbs, and she stopped when she saw Jed, her blue eyes wide with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "Mourning Dove," Kills the Bear said softly. "This is the man we saw." Jed's gaze was drawn again to the locket around her neck. It was an exact match to his own, untarnished and whole. An old silversmith in San Antonio had made them a matched set, a promise of a future that had never come to pass. He spoke to her directly, his voice softer than he intended. "That's a beautiful locket." She touched it protectively. "It was with me when my father found me. It is all I have of the world I came from." She hesitated, then added with a quiet strength, "My father taught me the ways of the people. But the locket tells me of a world I never knew." The pieces were clicking into place, forming a picture so impossible, so painful, that Jed's mind recoiled from it. The Locust plague 18 years ago. Kills the bear, finding an infant with a silver locket. Isabella had been pregnant when she left him. A child he never knew he had. A daughter he thought had died in the fire with her mother. He must have swayed, for Kills the bear's hand shot out to steady him. "The storm in your eyes grows stronger," the warrior observed. Jed stared at the girl, his daughter, and saw not just Isabella's eyes, but the ghost of his own determined chin and the set of his shoulders. A lifetime of grief and regret washed over him. The child he had mourned, the final, most terrible casualty of his failure, was alive. She was standing right in front of him. He knew with a sudden chilling certainty that Blackwood was not just after the land. His methodical acquisition, his obsession with the date of the raid, his focus on this specific area, it was all connected. And if Jed, a stranger, could piece together Mourning Dove's identity, then a man like Silas Blackwood, a man with a deep personal connection to that tragedy, would surely know as well. He realized Blackwood's web wasn't just about land. Mourning Dove was at its center. She was the prize. That evening, a rider from the Comanche camp found Jed in town. Kills the bear had requested his presence. There was an urgency in the messenger's eyes that spoke of more than just a simple meeting. Jed saddled his horse and rode out under a sky bruised with the colors of a dying sun. He found Kills the bear waiting for him on a bluff overlooking the vast darkening landscape. The warrior stood like a statue carved from the red rock, his gaze fixed on the distant, flickering lights of redemption. "Blackwood's men came to the canyon," Kills the bear said without preamble, his voice grim. "They did not attack. They offered to buy the water rights to our spring, for a price that would make a rich man of me." "He's trying to squeeze you out," Jed stated. It was Blackwood's signature move. It was not a negotiation, Kills the bear continued, turning to face Jed. It was an assessment. His men watched Mourning Dove. Their eyes were cold, like a wolf's before a kill. The cold dread in Jed's gut solidified into a knot of ice. He knows who she is. He knows, Kills the bear affirmed. "I have known for many years that she was not of the people by birth. The locket told a story I could not read. But I saw the way you looked at her. You see a story you thought had ended." Jed's throat was tight. He couldn't bring himself to say the word daughter. It was a title he hadn't earned a right he had forfeited a decade ago in a cloud of smoke and ash. Her mother. Her name was Isabella. He finally forced the words out. "The locket was a gift from me. I thought they both died in a fire at the old Blackwood ranch." Kills the bear was silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of Jed's confession. "So the ghost that haunts you has a name," he said, his voice laced with a surprising empathy. "And now the man who wants her land has a name as well." Blackwood. Jed breathed the name, tasting like poison. The coincidence was no coincidence at all. It was the key. He had to be sure. He had to know everything. That night, Jed became a ranger again. He moved through the sleeping town like a shadow, his footfalls silent in the dust. Blackwood's office was on the second floor of the bank, a fortress of brick and mortar. A locked door and a window were trivial obstacles to a man with his skills. He slipped inside a ghost in the house of his enemy. The office was as meticulous and cold as the man himself. Ledgers were stacked in perfect order, pens aligned on the blotter. But Jed wasn't interested in ledgers. He was looking for something personal. Behind a heavy oak bookshelf, he found a small fireproof safe. It took him 20 minutes of patient, painstaking work, with a set of borrowed tools, his ears attuned to the faintest click of the tumblers. The safe swung open with a quiet sigh. Inside, nestled amongst stacks of currency and legal documents, was a worn, leather-bound Bible. Its cover was singed at the edges. A family Bible. Jed carried it to the window, the moonlight casting a pale glow on the gilded pages. He opened it to the family registry. The names were written in a neat flowing script. Daniel Blackwood, born 1828. Married to Sarah Miller, 1850. Son Thomas Blackwood, born 1852. His eyes scanned down the page, his heart hammering against his ribs. And there it was, a second entry under the patriarch's name. Silas Blackwood, born 1832. Silas Blackwood was Daniel Blackwood's younger brother, the man whose family had died in the raid, the man whose land Jed's rangers had stormed. The world seemed to drop out from under him. This entire town, this web of deceit and intimidation, this slow, suffocating conquest, it was all built on a foundation of pure, unadulterated revenge. Silas believed Jed had murdered his brother, his sister-in-law, his nephew. And he must have learned somehow that another child survived. Isabella's child, Jed's child. A wave of nausea washed over him. Blackwood had spent a decade building his empire for a single purpose, to dismantle Jed's world as surely as the fire had dismantled his. And Mourning Dove, the innocent living embodiment of Jed's past, was the final piece. Blackwood wasn't just going to take the land. He was going to take away the last person on earth Jed could ever care about a daughter he had only just found. He found one more thing tucked into the back of the Bible. A small yellowed newspaper clipping. It was an old report from the San Antonio Express detailing the tragic end of the Blackwood family. It named the ranger in charge of the operation Sergeant Jedediah Stone. Silas hadn't been guessing. He had known Jed's name for 10 years. He had been waiting for him. Jed placed the Bible back in the safe, his movements precise and mechanical. The cold clarity of his purpose was terrifying. He was no longer a man running from his past. He was a man with everything to lose. He closed the safe, rose to his feet, and stared out the window at the sleeping town. The storm Kills the Bear had seen in his eyes was no longer just a storm. It was a hurricane, and it was about to make landfall in redemption. The air grew heavy in the days that followed, charged with an unspoken tension that felt like lightning waiting to strike. Jed met again with Kills the Bear, this time in the sacred quiet of the Comanche camp. He laid out the truth as he now knew it, the words stark and ugly in the clean desert air. Silas Blackwood is the brother of the man who died in that fire. Jed explained, his voice low and steady. He thinks I murdered his family. He's been building this empire of his for one reason: revenge. And Mourning Dove is his endgame. Kills the Bear listened, his face an unreadable mask of weathered stone, but his eyes held the deep, knowing sorrow of a man who understood the destructive power of hatred. Vengeance is a fire that consumes the one who carries it, he said, his voice a low rumble. This man Silas has let it burn for a long time. Now he wishes to use it to burn our world. He will come for her, Jed stated. It was not a guess. It was a certainty. And we have to be ready. An alliance was forged in that moment, not with a handshake or a sworn oath, but with a shared look of grim understanding. They were two fathers from two different worlds, a disgraced lawman and a proud warrior, bound by a single sacred duty to protect the girl they both loved. I found her in a field of silent wings, Kills the Bear said, his gaze softening, as he looked toward the teepee where Mourning Dove was working. The locusts had eaten everything. The land was dead and gray. But in the center of it all was this small crying life, a star in a dead sky. I have raised her as my own. Her heart is of the people, but the blood of your world runs in her veins. It is a conflict she has always carried. I ran from that blood, from that world for 10 years. Jed confessed, the words tasting like ash. I can't run anymore. They began to prepare. Kills the Bear sent scouts to watch Blackwood's movements, their silent presence in the hills around Redemption, a constant, unseen threat. Jed, for his part, became a visible one. He no longer skulked in the shadows. He walked the dusty street with his Colt strapped to his hip, his duster pushed back, a clear challenge to Blackwood's authority. He was a lawman without a badge, but the way he moved, the cold purpose in his eyes, left no doubt as to what he was. The townsfolk, long cowed by Blackwood, began to watch Jed with a flicker of something that might have been hope. He was a single man against an empire, but he was unbowed. The inevitable confrontation came not with a thunderous charge, but with the quiet, venomous precision that was Blackwood's trademark. One afternoon, Morning Dove rode into town to trade for supplies, accompanied by 2 young Comanche warriors. Jed watched her from the hotel window, a protective ache in his chest. Blackwood's trap was perfectly laid. A staged brawl erupted outside the general store, drawing the attention of the 2 warriors. In the ensuing chaos, 2 of Blackwood's hired gunsmen with dead eyes and the casual brutality of seasoned predators separated Morning Dove from her protectors. It was over in seconds. A hand over her mouth, a swift, brutal shove into a waiting wagon, and she was gone. It was not a clumsy abduction. It was a calculated military-style extraction. By the time Jed got there, the street was empty, save for the 2 bruised warriors and the settling dust. But pinned to the general store's door with a Bowie knife was a single folded piece of paper. Jed's name was written on it in Blackwood's elegant script. He tore it from the wood. The message inside was simple, chilling, and utterly predictable. To the ruins. Anniversary night, come alone. Anniversary night. The 10th anniversary of the raid. It was 2 days away. The sky was already beginning to cloud over the horizon, turning a sickly shade of purple. The air was unnaturally still, the calm before a violent break. A storm was coming, a physical manifestation of the tempest that had been brewing for a decade. Jed showed the note to Kills the Bear, whose face became a mask of cold fury. He takes her to the place of her mother's death, the warrior seethed. He seeks to poison her spirit before he breaks it. It's not her he wants to break, Jed said grimly. It's me. The 2 days felt like an eternity. Jed cleaned his Colt until the metal gleamed. He checked his rifle, his ammunition. He was a machine being honed for a single violent purpose. He and Kills the Bear planned their approach. Blackwood had said to come alone, but neither man was foolish enough to believe he would be afforded the same courtesy. Kills the Bear and a handful of his best warriors would follow a silent, deadly shadow and deal with whatever men Blackwood had posted as sentries. The final confrontation inside the ruins would be for Jed alone. It had to be. This was his ghost to face. On the evening of the 2nd day, the storm broke. The sky, which had been threatening for days, finally unleashed its fury. Rain fell in thick, slanting sheets, turning the dust to a slick, grasping mud. Wind howled through the canyons, a mournful, savage cry, and flashes of lightning illuminated the skeletal remains of the landscape. Jed mounted his horse, pulling his hat down low against the deluge. He looked at Kills the Bear, the rain plastering the warrior's long hair to his face. "Bring my daughter home," Kills the Bear said, his voice nearly lost in the roar of the wind. Jed nodded, his face set like granite. "I will." He spurred his horse forward, riding into the heart of the storm, toward the ruins where his past and future were set to collide in a blaze of lightning and gunfire. The ride was a battle against the elements. The wind tore at Jed's duster, and the rain, cold and relentless, felt like 1,000 tiny needles against his skin. His horse struggled through the sucking mud, its breath coming in ragged, steaming bursts. Above the sky was a canvas of roiling black, ripped open every few seconds by jagged scars of lightning. Each flash offered a stark monochrome glimpse of the world, a twisted mesquite, a terrified jackrabbit, and a head rising from the plains like a row of broken teeth, the ruins of the Blackwood Ranch. He dismounted a quarter-mile out the ground, too treacherous for riding. He left his horse tethered in a small ravine, giving the animal a final steadying pat on the neck. As he moved forward on foot, he saw fleeting shadows detaching themselves from the larger darkness around him. Kills the bear and his warriors moving with a supernatural silence that even the raging storm could not betray. They would handle the perimeter. The ruins themselves were even more desolate up close. The main house was a skeletal frame of charred timbers, its stone chimney standing as a solitary defiant tombstone. The wind howled through the empty window frames, a symphony of grief. 10 years ago, this place had been a home. Now it was a monument to Jed's failure. He drew his Colt, the cold steel, a familiar anchor in the chaos. He moved toward the gaping maw that had once been the front door, his boots sinking into the mud. Inside, the only light came from a single lantern hanging from a blackened beam, its flame guttering wildly in the drafts. It cast long dancing shadows that writhed like tormented spirits. And in the center of the room, Silas Blackwood stood waiting. He was as immaculate as ever, his black suit somehow untouched by the storm. He held Mourning Dove in front of him, one arm wrapped around her waist, the other holding a small silver-plated derringer to her temple. Mourning Dove was defiant, her chin held high, but Jed could see the fear in her wide blue eyes, Isabella's eyes. Right on time, Marshal Silas said, his voice a calm, chilling counterpoint to the storm's fury. He used the old title like a weapon. I was beginning to think you'd lost your nerve. Let her go, Blackwood. Jed's voice was a low growl. This is between you and me. Silas laughed, a dry, humorless sound. Oh, it is far, far more than that. This is about history, about legacy. This is where you, Sergeant Stone, in your righteous fury burned my family alive. My brother Daniel, his wife Sarah, my nephew Thomas. He recited the names like a catechism. You took my blood, so I thought it only fitting that I take yours. He gestured with the derringer toward Mourning Dove. A beautiful child, so full of life. She has her mother's eyes. Did you know I remember Isabella? A lovely, spirited woman. A terrible judge of character marrying my brother, but lovely nonetheless. And then consorting with a butcher like you. The raid was a mistake, Jed said, his voice raw. We had bad information. We thought we had rustlers cornered. We never knew your family was in there until it was too late. Lies. Silas hissed his composure, finally cracking his voice, rising to a near shriek. You and your rangers were nothing but government-sanctioned killers. You murdered them in cold blood to cover your tracks, to steal what was theirs. Lightning flashed, illuminating the raw hatred twisting Silas's handsome features into a grotesque mask. The lantern swayed violently, and for a second, Jed saw it. Tucked into Silas's vest pocket was a bundle of papers, yellowed and folded. You've spent 10 years believing a lie, Jed said, taking a slow, deliberate step forward. The floorboards groaned under his weight. I have spent 10 years building the instrument of your destruction, Silas countered, his grip tightening on Mourning Dove. I own this valley. I own the law. And now I own your last hope for redemption. I'm going to kill her Stone. And then I'm going to kill you. And I will sleep soundly for the first time in a decade. He was reveling in his moment of triumph, a mad playwright, savoring his final act. It was that arrogance that gave Jed his opening. You want to talk about history, Silas? Jed said, his voice dropping, drawing the man's focus. Let's talk about the truth. As he spoke, he saw Silas's eyes narrow, his sick curiosity piqued. This was the moment. In a motion too fast to follow, Jed's hand dropped. Not to his holstered gun, but to the mud at his feet. He scooped up a handful of the thick, wet clay and flung it with all his strength at the lantern. The glass globe shattered. The flame hissed and died, plunging the room into absolute darkness. Mourning Dove screamed. Silas cursed. A shot from the Derringer went wild, the muzzle flash a brief startling star in the blackness. Jed moved. Guided by sound and memory, he dove to the side, rolling as he hit the slick floor. The storm raged outside, the thunder a deafening cannonade. Another flash of lightning. It lasted only a second, but it was enough. He saw Silas disoriented, shoving Mourning Dove away as he tried to locate his target. Jed was on his feet in an instant. He lunged not at Silas, but at Mourning Dove, grabbing her and pulling her down behind the crumbling stone of the hearth. "Stay down," he ordered. Silas fired again blindly into the dark. The bullet ricocheted off the chimney with a high-pitched scream. "You can't hide forever." Stone Silas roared, his voice unhinged. "This is my stage, my story." Another brilliant flash of lightning lit the scene. Silas stood in the middle of the room, his hair wild, his suit now spattered with mud. And in his rage, he had pulled the papers from his pocket, waving them as if they were a holy text. "All the proof I ever needed," he screamed into the storm. "A letter from my own brother, written the very day you killed him, describing the Comanche hunters he saw, the very reason they were hiding. Proof you were in league with them." He was so consumed by his madness, so desperate to justify his decade of hate, that he didn't see Jed closing the distance. Jed tackled him, a brutal driving impact that sent both men sliding across the muddy floor. The Derringer flew from Silas's grasp. The letter fluttered away. They grappled in the dark, two men locked in a primal struggle. Silas was surprisingly strong, his body wiry and fueled by a fanatic's energy. He clawed at Jed's face, hissing curses. Jed landed a solid punch to his jaw, rewarded with a satisfying crunch of bone. A final blinding bolt of lightning struck the chimney outside. The stones groaned, and a shower of sparks and soot rained down. In the lingering ethereal light, Jed saw the letter lying near the hearth. He scrambled for it, Silas clawing at his back. He got his hand on the brittle paper. He rolled away, putting distance between them, and pulled a match from his duster. Shielding the flame from the wind, he struck it. In the small, flickering light, he read the frantic, desperate scrawl. "My dearest Silas, we are in terrible danger. Not from the Rangers, they are only investigating the rustling. We are hiding from a Comanche war party we spotted at dusk. In our haste to conceal our light, Sarah knocked over a lamp in the cellar. The fire, it is out of control. We are trapped. If you are reading this, it means we did not make it. Do not blame the law. It was an accident. Our own foolish accident." The match burned Jed's fingers, and he dropped it. The truth in Daniel Blackwood's own hand lay exposed. Silas stared at the letter, then at Jed, his face a canvas of disbelief and horror. "No. No, it can't be," he whispered. "You knew," Jed said, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. "This whole time, you knew." The hatred in Silas's eyes collapsed, replaced by a vast, empty despair. His shoulders slumped. The monster was gone. In its place was just a broken, pathetic man who had built his life on a lie he had willingly told himself. His quest for justice was a sham. It had always been about hate. Jed rose to his feet, his Colt steady in his hand, its barrel aimed at Silas's heart. He had him. He could end it right here. Vengeance was his for the taking. He looked at the cowering man, then at Mourning Dove, who was staring at him, her face streaked with rain and tears. He thought of the innocent family he had inadvertently killed. He thought of his 10 years of running. Killing Silas would only make him the man Silas had always pretended he was. Slowly, deliberately, Jed lowered his gun. He ejected the shells, letting them fall one by one into the mud. Justice, not vengeance. "It's over, Silas," he said, his voice weary but clear. The storm outside began to subside, its fury spent. At that moment, the doorway filled with figures. Kills the Bear and his warriors, silent and lethal, their faces grim in the dawning light. They had seen it all. They had witnessed Jed's final choice. Silas Blackwood just knelt in the mud, staring at his brother's letter, a man finally and irrevocably destroyed by his own heart. The first light of dawn broke through the retreating storm clouds, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and gray. The rain softened to a drizzle, washing the world clean. In the ruins of the Blackwood Ranch, the immediate violent aftermath gave way to a profound and heavy silence. Kills the Bear stepped forward, his warriors fanning out to secure the area. He looked from the broken figure of Silas Blackwood to Jed, who stood tall and weary, his choice still hanging in the air between them. Kills the Bear gave a slow, single nod. It was a gesture of immense respect, an acknowledgement of the harder path Jed had taken. Morning. Dove ran to Jed, her relief so overwhelming that she momentarily forgot the years of cultural distance between them. She threw her arms around him, burying her face in his soaked duster. Jed stood stiffly for a moment, unused to such contact, before his own arms came up to tentatively embrace her. He held his daughter for the first time, the feeling both strange and profoundly right. A short time later, the sound of hoofbeats announced the arrival of the town's sheriff and a hastily assembled posse. They had likely been waiting for the storm to pass and for Blackwood's men to signal an all clear that never came. They found a scene that defied all their expectations. Silas Blackwood, the untouchable ruler of redemption, sitting in the mud, his spirit shattered. Jed, the quiet stranger. And a group of Comanche warriors armed and resolute in complete control. Jed explained nothing of the personal history. He simply handed the sheriff the derringer and pointed to Silas. "He abducted this girl. You'll find his men scattered between here and the canyon. Some of them might need a doctor, others a shovel." The sheriff, a man long accustomed to taking orders from Blackwood, was paralyzed by indecision. He looked at Blackwood, then at the grim faces of Kills the Bear's warriors, and finally at the cold, unwavering authority in Jed's eyes. He made the prudent choice. He and his men took Silas into custody, hauling the unresisting man to his feet and leading him away. The reign of Silas Blackwood over redemption had ended not with a bang, but with the quiet revelation of a pathetic truth. As the posse departed, Jed walked with Kills the Bear to the edge of the ruins. The sun was now a sliver of gold on the horizon. "He is your blood, Kills the Bear," set his gaze on Morning Dove, who was speaking softly with one of the young warriors. "And you are her father." Jed replied, the words coming without envy or resentment. "You saved her. You raised her. That is a title I have no claim to." "A man can have two fathers," Kills the Bear said with quiet wisdom. "One who gave her life and one who taught her how to live it. She will need to learn the ways of your world, the part of her that the locket speaks to. Perhaps you are the one to teach her." It wasn't a concession, but an invitation. A bridge being built between two worlds with Morning Dove as its keystone. Jed approached her as Kills the Bear and his men prepared to leave. He didn't know where to begin, how to explain a decade of grief and a lifetime of regret. He started simply. "My name is Jedediah Stone," he said, his voice soft. "Your mother's name was Isabella. She was very dear to me. A long time ago, I gave her a locket just like yours." He pulled the broken pieces of his own from his pocket, showing them to her. Morning. Dove looked at the two halves in his calloused palm, and then at the whole one around her neck, and understanding dawned in her incredible blue eyes. Tears welled, but she did not cry. She simply reached out and gently closed his fingers over the broken pieces. It was a gesture of acceptance, of a new and complicated beginning. 3 months later, the town of Redemption was breathing again. The sun still beat down with the same intensity, but the oppressive weight of Silas Blackwood's influence had lifted. New businesses were opening, and a sense of cautious optimism had taken root in the cracked, dry soil. Silas Blackwood was gone, taken by federal marshals to stand trial for a litany of crimes far from the town he had once held in his thrall. Jedediah Stone had stayed. The town council, desperate for a lawman with integrity, had offered him the marshal's star. After a lifetime of running, he had finally found a place to stop. He wore the star not as a symbol of his past, but as a promise for his future. His relationship with Mourning Dove was a thing of quiet, tentative growth. She divided her time between the Comanche camp and the small house Jed had taken at the edge of town. He taught her to read and write English, to understand the complexities of the world her mother had come from. In return, she taught him the names of the desert plants, the signs of changing weather, and the quiet patience of the land itself. She was a bridge, and in walking it with her, Jed found himself healing wounds he thought were fatal. One cool autumn afternoon, Jed walked to the small cemetery on the hill overlooking the town. He stopped before a simple wooden grave marker, newly placed. He had brought Isabella's remains from the unmarked grave at the ruins and given her a proper resting place. The inscription was simple: Isabella, beloved. He took the silver locket from his pocket. He had sent it to the old silversmith in San Antonio, who had remembered the matched set he'd made all those years ago. The hinge was repaired, the tarnish polished away. It gleamed in the afternoon light, whole once more. He didn't open it. He no longer needed the constant, painful reminder of his guilt. He had a living, breathing reminder of his capacity for love, and that was enough. He gently placed the mended locket on the earth of her grave, a final letting go. It was a gesture of forgiveness for the past, for Silas, and most importantly, for himself. He stood for a long while, the breeze rustling the dry grass around him. He was no longer the haunted man who had stepped off the stagecoach. The ghosts were still there, but they no longer held power over him. They were simply a part of his story chapters in a book that was not yet finished. He turned and looked out at the vast, sprawling landscape toward the distant line of the horizon. He saw Mourning Dove riding toward town, her silhouette strong and free against the setting sun. He was not a man running from his past or chasing a future. For the first time in a very long time, he was simply a man standing in the present, ready for whatever came next. He had found his redemption not in a place, but in a purpose.